You're listening to a CNA podcast. If you want to become a doctor in India, one thing's for sure. You have to sit for the country's National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test, officially known as NEET. But many are calling it a mess. Every year, millions of students sit for the exam. Their result determines which medical college they go to, if any at all. This year, though, a major scandal. An unprecedented number of candidates scored unusually high marks. In fact, 6 perfect scores came from the same testing center. Then came the finger-pointing, accusations of paper leaks and fraud. Students weren't just mad, they were furious. I'm Teresa Tang. In this episode, Ishan Garg joins me from New Delhi to talk about the fallout and what's next for these students. Hi, Ishan. Welcome back.
Hello. Hi, Teresa. Thank you very much for having me.
I don't know about you, but for me, back in the day, I loved school. I was a nerd. I didn't love the exams, though. What about you? Test taking when you were growing up in India, were you a fan?
I have mixed feelings. It really depended on the subject. If it was a math exam, I did not love it. Actually, I have nightmares to this day of me failing a math exam. I never did, but I still have those nightmares. On the other hand, if it was like social sciences or English, I absolutely loved it. But, I never had to retake any of my exams. None of my exams were ever postponed. So I obviously had a very different experience from these hundreds of thousands of students in India right now.
Yeah, I can't imagine having to write one exam that would determine the trajectory of my entire career. Before we get into the scandal, can you tell us why being a doctor or a medical professional is so coveted in India? Is it the pay? Is it the prestige?
It's a bit of both and a few more things. So pay is certainly a huge part of it because doctors, especially those who work in the private sector, they get paid really handsomely. There's obviously the prestige because not only are you a medical professional, but you're also a medical professional in a country where about 60% of the population lives in villages. Many people do not have higher education. And when they are facing an ailment, a disease, a doctor can be a lifesaver. A doctor can be somebody who a lot of people would even consider gods if they are treated properly, if somebody's kid is saved by a doctor. So there's a huge amount of prestige associated with being a doctor. And, many people in this country would not see this profession as a profession, particularly. They would see doctors as healers, people who are out there to do a public service. So that's a huge part of it. There's also the factor that a lot of doctors work on establishing hospitals, their own medical institutions, and they would want to pass on that to their kids. And that's also a big reason why a lot of kids in India take up this profession, because they want to continue what their parents built for them. And lastly, there's also the societal pressure of doing something worthwhile that attracts a lot of money and prestige if you've done academically well.
So this exam, the NEET exam, it involves not just the students, but their families as well. Many have invested a lot financially for this opportunity. And I can imagine that this scandal was a shock to them. How much is at stake for those who are involved?
Well, it's certainly a family affair because in a student's career path, their entire family is invested. Not many people in India have the opportunity to make a great career for themselves. So when an academically proficient student wants to become a doctor, in a large variety of cases, you would find that, people sending their kids to big cities, spending a lot of money on their boarding, their lodging, their fooding, and just ensuring that, when the parents make the sacrifices, children are able to appear for exams, crack the exams. So it's a big family affair, and there's a huge amount of pressure financially on the parents. There's also the burden of expectations on the students. And of course, the competition itself in these exams is massive. If we talk about the NEET undergraduate exams, more than 2 million students would take it. And roughly 1 out of 23 students would be able to get a college. And that's just securing a seat in the college. They might not get the college they want. They might not get it in the geography that they want. So when something like this happens, when an exam is allegedly compromised to some degree, it's a huge amount of pressure. It's a big shock to the students. Let's listen into what one of the students who I spoke to had to say. His name is Raghav Dhingra. He's about 27 years old, and he was about to take the NEET exam when he was suddenly notified that the exams would be postponed.
How can they postpone the exam just before the night? Then suddenly lots of messages. I got a call from my close friends, those who are also preparing for this exam, that it's real, that exam has been postponed. So that was like huge a mental trauma. I was shocked. How can it be possible? But that was true.
There was also Yashasvi Singh, who says that NEET exam should be reconducted because of the effort that students put into it. And that's really the big part of it for the students, because when they see that there are inadequacies with the way the exam centers are being prepared, or there are inadequacies with the way the exams are being conducted, they sort of feel cheated, and they feel that if there is a way to bypass this mechanism, what's their years and years of preparation has been for.
And it's very sad to hear because the students worked very hard for the exam. So I think that the NEET exam should be reconducted again.
Soon after the accusations, there were nationwide protests. Students demanded that the Supreme Court do something, that they conduct an inquiry. And the court has come out. They've said, there's not going to be a retest for the NEET undergraduate exam. And the judges have said there's no data that suggests a systemic breach occurred. But Ishan, the court did say that it's clear questions were leaked and the sanctity of the exam was compromised. Can you translate that for us? What does that mean? Is there any chance that this year's exam will be held again, or maybe the results cancelled?
Well, the big thrust of Supreme Court's decision was to say that we don't want to waste the labor of more than 2 million students because there were inadequacies in some exam centers. There were problems with some exam centers affecting just a few dozen students. So they don't want to sacrifice the labor of so many other students because some students faced problems with it. But of course, if you speak to the students, they would say that it's not about just this few dozen students who thought that the exams were compromised. It's about the integrity of the exam itself and the message that it sends to the student community out there, people who've been preparing for these exams. And what's odd about the whole episode is what the local police and officials were doing in different states and what the federal exam conducting body, the NTA, was doing. So on 5th of May, first of all, police in 2 different states, they arrested people for allegedly leaking exam question papers. They were apparently leaked just 24 hours before the exam. And on the day of the exam itself, the National Testing Agency came out with a press release. They said exams have been conducted all across the country and the process has been really smooth. But soon after that, reports started emerging of how a group of students in the state of Bihar had accessed question papers 24 hours in advance. There were also concerns that some of the examination centers were compromised, which led to a delay in the students appearing for the exams. And then some students, because of that delay, were awarded grace marks, which was basically the government's way of saying, we are going to compensate you for the time that was wasted. And that really kicked off this controversy because that grace marks, a lot of students said, resulted in so many of these students securing nearly perfect marks, which was unheard of. And that's where the whole problem started. But now students are saying that after the Supreme Court's decision to not cancel the exams, they're going to file a review petition in the court. Usually these review petitions don't work out in the petitioner's favors because Supreme Court is the highest legal authority in the country, and there has to be very solid substance behind these review petitions, but it's going to take its legal course. And if the students are lucky, they might get another shot at trying to explain to the Supreme Court why the exam should be cancelled.
Okay, so there's the NEET-UG exam. That's for undergraduates, right? Aspiring to be medical professionals. But there's another exam, and it's called the NEET-PG or postgraduate. And that one is for doctors who want to continue their studies in specific fields. And that exam was postponed until August the 11th as well, due to reports of impersonation threats. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, this happened just a few weeks after the NEET-UG exam controversy was erupting. It was actually in the middle of the protests when NEET-UG students, the undergraduate students, they were already taking to the streets. And this was really a shocker for a lot of students because they were basically going to bed thinking that they're going to appear for their exams tomorrow. But it was cancelled basically the night before. And officials said that they had received credible intelligence that some people were impersonating medical students and were going to appear for the exams. And this seems like something out of a Bollywood movie, because essentially the intelligence suggested that people who'd already studied in the medical profession for a lot of years, people who could have been involved with medical coaching centers, tuition centers, they were going to impersonate students, sit in the exams, take the exams on behalf of the students, and hopefully be able to get them a spot in medical colleges. So that was this whole controversy. And when we spoke to the students, they essentially said that, well, when you go and become a postgraduate student, when you try and become a postgraduate student, what you've done essentially is that you've completed your undergraduate degree. You didn't go into a job because you thought you would take up this next course. Mm-hmm. And if the exam gets postponed, you're not only wasting your time, you've also wasted the opportunity to progress your career. You've also wasted the opportunity to make an earning for several months. So it was a huge shock for a lot of PG students. And we spoke to some of the unions of PG students who'd been in contact with the health ministry, and they said that the government was listening to their concerns, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why a swift decision was taken to postpone the exams and hold it in just a few weeks.
In terms of responsibility, a lot of blame is being placed on the National Testing Agency, or NTA, and that's the government organization that conducts this exam. There have been very vocal calls for it to be disbanded or overhauled, right?
Absolutely. I mean, NTA is facing a lot of flack because, first of all, it's not a very old agency. It was just set up in 2017. And there are many critics who say that it's still not got its bearings together. It's unable to conduct exams properly. It still doesn't have all the protocols that it needs to have in place to make sure that exams are not compromised. And just the look of having scandal after scandal hit the agency just back to back in a few weeks is not a good look. And that's why there have been calls to disband the agency. There were also calls to have the education minister of the country, Dharmendra Pradhan, resign, which he hasn't done, but he took those questions head on and he answered them in the parliament, he answered them in press conferences. And many of the critics are saying that actually the medical exams, they should be held under a new agency that takes care of not only the NEET UG exams, but all the medical exams that are conducted throughout the country. Because at the moment, it's a pretty fractured system. The undergraduate exams are conducted by the NTA. The postgraduate exams, the exams that are meant for advanced studies, those are all conducted by separate organizations. And now what the government's doing is it's going to set up a panel to investigate what actually might be wrong, what could have gone wrong, and they are going to try and institute some more changes in the NTA, which hopefully will ensure that cases like these do not happen again.
Is this scandal going to touch Prime Minister Modi, though? Many have pointed to the fact that this is really the first test he's had to face since his re-election. And critics, in particular Congress leader Rahul Gandhi, he says the Prime Minister has been too quiet on the scandal, that he's helpless at the hands of, quote, education mafia. What impact is this going to have on the Prime Minister?
Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi certainly his government as well faced a lot of flack for this controversy. And there were really two components to it. One was that many people saying that the government was incompetent in ensuring that the exams were held properly. Many people said that the Bharatiya Janata Party, Prime Minister Modi, who was, of course, the Prime Minister at the time when the exams were held, they were too busy conducting the elections. They were too busy with campaigning for the elections. And that's why they couldn't make sure that the exams were being held properly. The other part that Rahul Gandhi brought up is the question of these education mafias. And that's something not only Prime Minister Modi's government, but previous governments have also faced a lot of heat for, because there have been multiple reports of these small gangs of people who work in a coordinated fashion to get papers leaked ahead of time. And it has not only impacted the medical exams, it's impacted engineering exams, civil service exams, not of the top level, but the exams that are responsible for admission into the lower ranked government jobs. They've been impacted by these mafias. And there are allegations that a lot of coaching centers, tuition centers, they work hand in hand with these small groups of people to ensure that the students who study at those coaching centers, they are the ones who secure spot. And there have been multiple arrests in the past 15 years. A lot of people who are a part of this organized syndicate, so to say, have been put behind bars. But despite all of that, it continues to go on. And that's really a huge problem for the country, and certainly a huge problem for a lot of students. During the course of covering this story, we also spoke to a representative of FODA, the Federation of Resident Doctors Association. So Dr. Meeth Ghonia, who I met, told us that this is going to have an impact on the morale of the students, but also the healthcare infrastructure in the country when medical exams particularly are compromised.
They are frustrated. Like, they don't know what will happen in their life, because these examinations are future of the country. Like, this will shape their future. This will affect our healthcare infrastructure also, because it will delay the upcoming doctors in the force of the healthcare of the India.
I'm curious, is the ordinary Indian person even paying attention to what's been happening? Or has this scandal been confined to only those who are invested in a career in medicine?
Well, when you're invested in a career in medicine, it's knocking right on your doorstep. And that's why these students took part in the protest. They came out and spoke about this issue vehemently. But it also impacts the Indian population. And that's why when we were covering the story and we spoke to regular people on the streets, not just students, but just the general mass, they were certainly concerned about it, because they saw this as symptomatic of not something wrong with the medical exams per se, but they thought that's something wrong with the way India conducts its exams. And by and large, the big exams that India does conduct, whether it be for admission into engineering exams, even if it's for architecture services, engineering, railways, a lot of the positions in the countries get filled by exams that are conducted at the same scale as NEET undergraduate and postgraduate exams. And that's why a lot of people certainly do care about it. But there's another angle to it, which is medical professionals saying that if the medical exams are hindered, if they're not held the way they're supposed to be, it can actually have a material impact on the healthcare infrastructure in the country. Back when COVID hit India, a lot of things, they were impacted on. One of those things was the doctors' entrance exams, which meant that there has been a delay in the way doctors are admitted, especially the ones who are trying to get admission in the postgraduate course. And now with this NEET PG exams being deferred, they've been moved ahead. That would mean that there's going to be a shortage of doctors for at least a few months. And in a country like India, where there's supposed to be just one doctor for 1,000 people, way below what WHO recommends, this shortage of hospital staff can actually be a problem. And these resident doctors, the students who are part of the postgraduate program, they're actually the backbone of a lot of hospitals, because they are involved in day-to-day patient care.
I was reading about how these tests are actually conducted, how they're actually written. And Ishan, are they literally written exams with a pen and paper? You're nodding, yes?
Yes, they are very much pen and paper exams. They're very old school. And you're not even allowed to carry your own pen into the examination centers. They give you one at the examination center. It's supposed to be this particular kind of ballpoint pen that you can only use to fill out what's called an OMR sheet. It's basically a sheet where you have to fill in bubbles with the pen that's been provided to you. And they are super, super, super cautious about the things that you can take into the examination centers. For example, you can't take a water bottle with you. You obviously can't take any snacks or sweets. They make an exception for students who might be diabetic. They can carry sugar pills with them, but only if they let the examination center know well in advance. They can carry clear glass water bottles with them. And all of this is done to ensure that nobody is cheating on this test. And this kind of harks back to what we were speaking about earlier, because from a student's perspective, they see this as measures being taken to ensure the integrity of the exam is not compromised. And when they hear the news that, papers being leaked before they even got to the centers, that's actually what frustrates them the most.
Okay, so we're talking about actual paper and pens here. Then when we think about how we prevent this from happening again, obviously tech has to be a part of the equation, right?
Well, that's part of a huge debate. So there's so many doctors, students who say that you cannot have this pen and paper system anymore. You need to have a computer based examination and make sure that the exam is conducted all across the country with randomly generated questions, so that there isn't actually a question paper to be leaked. But India's experience in this regard has also been not of top notch. There was a few years ago a case where the Indian government said that they found hackers based in Russia trying to compromise the integrity of a separate engineering exams. So that's created some problems for the government. And their perspective is that until they can get the technology right, until they can completely ensure that the examination centers can't be hacked, the computers cannot be hacked, paper and pen systems will remain in place. There's also this concern that you're not only trying to have examination centers in big cities where there's ample infrastructure to put computer centers to have exams, you're also trying to get these centers in small towns and villages as well. And it's just going to be a huge logistical challenge if you try and convert your whole examination system from offline to online. It's certainly a work in progress, but until the government can ensure that there won't be any problems with an online system, and certainly until they can convince the students that there won't be any problem, it doesn't seem like at least the NEET exams are going to move to an online system.
Yeah, it really is a huge undertaking when you put it that way. I really sympathize with everybody that's caught up in this scandal because most of us have career aspirations, right? And for them to be compromised by no fault of our own, it's really unfair. Ishan, do you think all this drama is going to deter Indian students from pursuing medical professions in the future?
I don't think so, because even when we spoke to students who'd been impacted by this very controversy, they said it's something that they've been dreaming about, preparing for the past several years of their life, and they're invested into it. Now, there's also the fact that many students, especially the ones who come from lower income families, people who've traveled from villages and towns to big cities and prepare for all of this, they tend to be a lot more resilient to bad things happening in life. So they say it's par for the course. And they've got this tunnel vision that they've got an aim to achieve, which is becoming a doctor. So it doesn't matter if the exams are compromised, they're just going to sit again. And there's also, of course, the things that we spoke about earlier, the money, the prestige, and the social status that comes with being a doctor. So all of those things combined, it's unlikely that it's going to deter any students. But what's also equally important is perhaps students having confidence in the exam systems. We've been speaking to some educational experts who say that what the government needs to do right now is the first thing that they need to do really is to ensure that there is a proper chain of handing over documents, which particularly means the question papers, the answer keys, etc., all the way from when the question papers are prepared to when they reach the testing centers. And there needs to be an airtight system of getting these question papers circulated from the federal level down to the small villages where exams are going to be conducted. And until that gets put into place, there's this sort of problem, there's always a potential that it can crop up again in the future.
This saga clearly not over. I'm looking forward to your reports on this in the future. Really appreciate you breaking down this story for us today, Ishan.
Thank you very much, Teresa. It's a pleasure.
And a reminder that the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. And you can find Ishan's reports on YouTube and on CNA.Asia. The team behind this week's episode is Arjun Bala, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, Craig Dale, and myself, Teresa Tang. Thanks for joining us.